why don't we get started? We can roll into it. This is going to be a fairly informal tour. So the thing that I liked best the few times that I saw you all in person was getting stuff out and then letting you explore instead of guiding you through these. So I've got 2 cameras set up. I wish you were in the room here with me. We'll move through pieces as we go, but the idea is to show you some things that came in over the last couple of years when you haven't been able to come into the library to actually see new acquisitions. So I'll show them to you. I'll tell you a little bit about them, but please feel free to just ask questions as we go. There's nothing formal here other than a tour of the material. And as you'll see on the link that I put into chat, we're going to look at a couple of different categories of things: new acquisitions, newly digitized material, and then 2 pieces that were newly discovered in the vault. And I'll tell you more about those when we get to them. So first things first, let me see if I can share my screen and we'll get some of the cameras going. Share screen. And here we go. All right, so I'm going to just test the equipment here, make sure everything's working. Can all of you see what looks like a document in a box? Okay, great. And then we're going to switch cameras and see how this works. Can you see what looks like a fairly orange looking book off to the right-hand side and then some foam below it? So you will have no sense of scale for this. So I'm going to just put my arm on top of the book to give you an idea of what we're looking at here. This is a big book, and we'll come to that pretty soon. But that is my arm and a very big book. Okay, so it looks like the cameras are working. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the small one. And let's walk our way through some of these pieces. So first up on our list is a 13th century charter. And the things that I picked from our new acquisitions, some of them tie into the legal document materials that you heard about earlier this year. Some of them have to do with the physical interactions with books. You'll hear me grunt as I lift this giant antiphonal up. And some of them will be things that I can only point out on the camera, but that you really need to come back in person to see. So as we're doing this, bear in mind we're doing the best we can here with a couple cameras. So this first 13th century document that we've got right around 1206 is a charter, and you're seeing a portion of the object here. We're in about a 1.5 inch deep box that our conservation team made to house this. And they housed it this way because attached to this, let's see if I can scroll down here, is a very nice wax seal that's nearly intact. So the camera work here is going to be a little bit iffy, but hopefully it'll give you a sense of both how large this is. I'll put my fingers next to it. And then also the detail that survives here for you. And the document was purchased by our medieval studies and German studies curator, Kathleen Smith. It's a kind of a special charter by a, let's see, get that sorted out, by Wolfgang von Erla, who for musicologists is best known for being the patron of one of the Minnesinger, and was a fairly important person in his own right. This is the first time one of his documents has showed up on the market, really within the last 3 to 4 decades. Very few of them have been circulating. This document disappeared from where it was held in the 18th century and was thought to be lost. It was only known through later copies. than the document itself. But it had been in private hands, showed up from a personal collection, and we were fortunate enough to be able to bring it here to Stanford for folks to study. So a nice connection to both 13th century Germany, as well as to things that are dear to musicologists' hearts. So that's kind of the first one. Any questions, anything you want to see in more detail on this? I can drive the camera in closer if you'd like. And feel free to unmute and just ask a question if you've got them.
Yeah. What is it? What does it say?
What does it say? That's an excellent question. Let's see. So this is.
I guess it's an old German or Latin.
It's Latin, and it is. I'm trying to find what this actually is. Let's see here. I confess I haven't actually read this in any detail. Bill, have you been in to visit this? Nope.
He's muted.
He's
muted.
He's looking.
I haven't seen it.
Okay. So let's see if we can figure out anything here from this as we're scrolling in.
Google translates.
Yeah, right. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Let's see.
Beautiful writing.
It's really stunning hand.
It's right hand justified too.
That's right. You know, we could spend a little bit more time with it, and I am not sure off the top of my head what this is about.
Secondary priority.
Okay, but we can certainly follow up on that for you. I was just noticing that I don't think our catalog record even mentions what the content is, and it could be that we don't have a transcription yet. So volunteers, welcome.
Here's an easy one. Is it paper or parchment?
It's parchment, and you can kind of see down here at the bottom, where's my camera, difference in color between the hair side, which is folded up here, and the flesh side, which it's written on.
Yeah.
And then fairly substantial threads attaching the wax seal here. Okay, so first one, only slightly rocky to get started. Let's move on to the second document here. I'm gonna just push this over here. So now the next one, we will really invite Bill to describe in a little bit more detail, because this is something that I believe came in at least partially because of him. And what this is a small bifolium of 15th century music.
Oh.
And it's called the Boorman Fragment for Stanley Boorman, a famous scholar. And it contains music by three composers, I believe, that many of you may know: Guillaume Dufay, Nicolas Grenon, and Gilles Bonchouet. And so this is a rare example for us, anyway, of early polyphony. We didn't have anything like this in the collection, and very happy to have it. So, Bill, over to you. What are we looking at here?
When did you get it?
This came in about 2 years ago. I think it was 2019 that we purchased it.
I didn't know about it.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Well, those are three significant composers from the sort of mid 15th century. There certainly is earlier music than this, but it looks as if it's a fairly elaborate music.
It is. So we've got multiple voices recorded here. There is a tenor voice here in longer notes with secular music and some black and white notation up above. Let's see if we can scroll in just a little bit. And you can see that this was originally 2 pages. There's a fold in the middle. It was part of a binding, or not a binding, but part of a gathering of a much bigger book.
Yeah.
And this is all that survived. It was in, here's another tenor. So I think there are 3 songs here. They may not be entirely complete in their notation. We've got portions of a couple of voices and the complete tenors for a few of these. And text in French in the upper voices, and rhythmic notation. So it's a really special little piece of music, which I hope we'll hear performed at some point in time by the music department folks.
We should certainly do that, yes.
Super. Okay, any questions at this point about this fragment? Like the charter that you saw before, very few of these actually circulate, and we got very lucky in being able to purchase this. This came in through our former music librarian who found this at a dealer as soon as it came up for sale, purchased it with a number of us contributing funds across the library because it was so important. So it is here now. You're welcome to come in, and we encourage singing in the reading room whenever you're here. So enjoy. Okay, so then we will shift again.
Tell me, is it mostly, and William can help answer this, do you mostly by chance find these things are available, or does someone constantly search for medieval manuscripts and music or whatever?
Yeah, so I and a couple of my colleagues constantly search for medieval music and things like that. We also have dealers who will let us know and offer things that they think should be placed at Stanford. Just happened to be in a catalog from a dealer that we purchase from regularly who specializes in old musical material. And our librarian over in the music library was just on it as soon as he saw it because it is a fairly important thing for scholarship. So it's been nice to be able to get this fully digitized. You can see it in SearchWorks at the link that I've given in the document and explore in a little bit more detail.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, the next piece we're going to look at is a shabby little thing. And you might wonder why we buy something like this. So all you see is just a little fragment here with some red ink. On the back, it's mostly glue. You can't really see much with it. But this is a relic of the printing process from the 15th and 16th century. And they would use pieces of parchment to block off areas in the printing process to keep them from getting ink on it. So you see a little bit of ink transfer from a hand press here. That's what's in red. But what was interesting to me about it, and let's see if this works. If we put some UV light on it, just see a French text below. And it's a little bit hard to tell in this. I'll move the light away, put the light back. And if you were here in person, the French text pops out a little bit as we look at it under UV light. And it's a 13th century style of writing in the vernacular. That shows a little bit better. Let's see if I can get an angle there for you. There we go. And it happens to be from a French text that we can't identify. Nobody has been able to find this sequence of words strung together in any other existing editions anyway. So it's something that's going to bear a little bit more research to see if we can identify if this comes from a known text or if this is a witness for a lost 13th century text. And hopefully somebody in our French department will explore this in a little bit more detail, or you all, if you'd like to come in. But yeah, this just doesn't work quite as well online as it does in person as I'm looking across. but the text really does pop out if you're here. So I encourage you to come by and take a look at it when you can. So that was not a very expensive purchase, but it does a couple of different things for us. It shows us, first of all, basically a palimpsest, so text that's been lost that we can recover with ultraviolet light. And we're very interested here in scientific imaging of our medieval manuscripts, particularly for folks who are doing material engineering, so that they can get a sense of how these erased parchments work. But also, just as we talk about book history, to have a fragment of an early printing process that has survived is kind of fun. So just a little ephemeral piece there. Now, the next thing I'd like to pull out for you is a manuscript you may have seen before. So this is in the category of newly digitized materials. Now, let's see if we can get organized here. There we go. So the book I'm going to get out for you is one of the ones that's been in California the longest in our collection. And I'll tell you a little bit about it as we go. Hopefully I haven't told you this story before. But in the 1890s, a student named Joseph Jarnick entered Stanford in the classics department. And he came in as a special student. And if those of you who know Stanford history probably know that the special students were a program that Jane started for older, mostly men, particularly folks who had worked on the railroad, to come to Stanford for a year to see if they could qualify to continue with their degree. So Jarnick was about 35 when he came to Stanford. He had been working on the railroad in Wisconsin. And immediately fell in love with the classics. And so he stayed here for an undergraduate degree, performed in some of the early theatrical performances of classical plays that were put on here in the 1890s and early 1900s, and then wound up going up to Alta, California to teach. There was a private school up there run by a Stanford alum, and he was teaching classics up there basically to high school boys. So at some point, about 1906, we think, he purchased a manuscript, and he says he bought it from a German dealer. We're not sure which German dealer. And it happens to be a mutilated copy of Virgil's Bucolics, Georgics, and Aeneid. And it's mutilated because it's missing most of its decorated initials. They've been cut out, sometimes fairly roughly, as you can see here. But it's a beautiful 15th century hand. I'll zoom in just a little bit on this so that you can get a sense of what it looks like. So a really nice humanist hand, very legible, but all but one of the decorated initials have been cut out, and here you see one that's missing from the inside margin. So unfortunately, Jarnick got appendicitis and died very young. He died, I think, by 1908. Couldn't get down from Alta in time to get to the hospital. And he left his manuscript to Ashton Fairclough, the early classics professor. And Fairclough kept it in his collection until the 50s and then gave it to Stanford with his estate. So this has been associated with Stanford since the early 1900s. It's been cataloged as coming from Florence. And there's no reason not to think that based on what we see of the book. It looks like a Florentine hand, but, and here we'll try this again, several of the pages have writing that's been erased. This is not going to show up well for you. Let's see if you can just zoom in enough to get a sense. So if you look carefully and faintly under UV light, you can see text running this way across this page.
Mhm.
And that happens on a number of folios. So
Hmm.
under UV light, you can do just enough transcription to recognize that these are court documents. And they are from Ferrara, from the Este court in Ferrara in the mid-15th century.
Interesting.
And there is a composer mentioned here, Bill, I think you'll appreciate this, Matthew of Bologna,
Mhm.
about whom we know very little other than that he was in Ferrara in the 15th century. So somewhere under here, there's some musical history that we can tease out as we get going. So the first thing we did to start accessing that was do natural light digitization of the full manuscript, which you can explore in detail at the link in the document I gave you. And the next step then will be to digitize those folios have on them with multispectral light so that we can recover and see what we can find out about this book in more detail. Okay, so those were our two things, old things in a new light. So next, I figured since you all had been doing so much work in a couple of your lectures with legal documents, that we would get out a couple of some of the new legal documents that have come into the collection. And the first one I'm going to put out, I'd like to see if you could guess a date on this. Let's see if we can zoom in just a little bit so that you get a better view. Try zooming in this way. That's more of my arm than you wanted to see, I'm sure.
Ah. They look like Black German almost. Didn't I feel him? I see William there.
Yep, great. So can you tell what's going on with this document from
Signature? Pope
Yeah.
William? No.
Yeah.
Something about William.
back out just a little bit
Oh,
more?
it's a marriage certificate.
So it's an interesting looking document, isn't it? Rough guess on date?
15th century.
How about earlier?
13.
How about earlier?
Oh, really?
Really?
Wow.
So this is 11th century, and it's a Spanish legal deed. And before you ask, I haven't transcribed this. We purchased this for a history professor named Rowan Doran, who has been working on Spanish legal documents from the 9th and 10th century. So this is one of two documents that we purchased. This one's from about 1062. The other one is from about 100 years earlier. So a really nice early legal document. Kind of rough, as you can see, but some interesting scribal additions for,
Like that.
yeah, really kind of fun. So new, not been worked on. We're ready to learn more as soon as Rowan starts diving into this. Okay. Let's see, the next one is another slightly later document. And both Rowan and Elaine Traharn are really interested in documentary material now. So we've been investing pretty heavily in these kinds of documents. They're on the market. They're not terribly expensive, and they open up a lot of opportunities for research for folks. So this is an English charter. You can tell that at one point in time it had two seals, but we've still got one that's mostly intact. Let's see if I can get a little more light on that.
When you say they are terribly expensive, what do you mean? Under, 100,000, under 2,000, what?
These are running under 1,000 for this kind of document. in some cases, we bought large collections for a couple of $1,000s. They are on the market, and nobody seems to want them, so we're buying them, buying them as quickly as we can. But the hand, so let's see if we can get that focused a little bit.
I like that.
Interesting hand.
It is a lot of contractions in there.
Do you think Latin, William? I see
It
gnome
is-
or gnome, something gnome.
He said it's Latin.
It is Latin,
Latin, yeah.
but you can recognize a couple words. So we've got, where's my finger? Whoop, there we go. So that's Coventry
Yeah,
right there. Oh, there's a lag. That's why that was weird. And then we have, let's see, Radolf Le Alley right here. So we've got a couple names that stand out.
yep.
And they're English names. There's also a Johannes Fitzley and his wife Margaret. And this is about some property in the area around Coventry in the early 13th century. So we can kind of tie it into both places and, you know, possibly the people that are associated with it. Like I said, this is new enough that it hasn't been worked on, but one of the things that Elaine is particularly interested in are the networks of people described in these documents. We have a number, actually 3 collections from East Anglia that number to a couple of hundred documents. And in those, the names get repeated often enough that we can start putting together networks of families that the documents are about. So a nice little piece here. Let's see, next up. Oh, here are some more legal documents of a very different type. So I'm always interested in how manuscripts get reused over time.
Interesting.
Now let's see if we can get enough height on this.
Gnome are so expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see, we'll zoom out just a little bit more here. There we go. All right. So this will give you a sense.
Palimpsest of Archimedes. Yeah.
That would be nice. So what we've got here is a manuscript that was used as a binding.
Very
Oh,
common.
interesting.
Very
And this is another one that Rowan Doran was particularly interested in. And we can kind of tell on the inside that there are a number of calculations that are happening. It's speculated that this was a cover for an accounting book, possibly. But what it's covered in is a 13th century Italian legal text. And so this is another one that's going to require a little bit of work to pull apart the exact content here. But you can see that there's enough that's legible that we could probably start finding words or phrases that would allow us to identify this text. It was looks like it was a beautiful manuscript to begin with, 2 columns, 2 large columns. Let's see if we can open this up a little bit. And you can see how much use it got over time as the covering for a book. So this sort of object, not only is Rowan interested in it for the text itself, but Traharn likes to use it as an example of the afterlives of a medieval manuscript. This is something that was sturdy and used and touched and rubbed, written on, and really has encounters over the years, including all of the additional math that was done on the sides here. And it's been pasted up, so there's a couple of different layers here. So there's some folding within, and here you can see the sewing structure of the book that it was bound around. Yeah. And Evelyn had asked where we find things like this. One of our dealers got this at auction and had let Rowan know that it was available, and it was something that he thought he could teach with, and so it was something that we were able to acquire for him. All right, next up. Okay, this one is something that Evelyn might be interested in, not so much for the document itself. Actually, all of you might. But for the little sack that holds the seal down at the bottom. So this is a 13th century English land grant. I'll zoom in just a little bit. And instead of being able to see that wax seal, they've tied a little bit of fabric around it. And it's kind of roughly woven fabric. Let's see if I can get that in any closer for you. So
it really is roughly.
Yep. And the wax has been wrapped in this fabric, sewed in. You can kind of see the sewing structure along the top there, and then sewn onto the leather fob that holds the seal. So if any of you are interested in doing a little bit of textile analysis with this, it would be wonderful to see what you thought about it. Okay, so moving from England then over to France.
Could I just ask why that piece was acquired?
Why that piece was acquired? Yeah, so that was a 13th century English grant, and that's the sort of thing that both Elaine and Rowan have been particularly interested in. Like I said, we've been buying a lot of those, and that came in as a set. Let's see, within the last, I think it came in last year. We purchased those at auction, so it of the summer auctions of manuscripts. So that's another way that we acquire things, is through that process of watching the auctions, trying to figure out what we can afford, and then crossing our fingers when we bid.
Are you able to share the range of costs roughly, just to give us any sense of that?
Sure. Yeah, for something like that, that was under $2,000 and came as a lot. So there were probably 4 or 5 documents together in that lot. So each individual one probably in the $300 to $400 range.
Thank you.
Sure. This one was a little bit more expensive, even though it looks so much more plain. And I'm going to tell you why, if I can zoom in just a little bit here. All right, so there are a few things to look at here.
Latin. I can't read Latin. Can you? Can you read your Latin?
So let's. Yeah, so first thing we'll do, we'll take a look at a couple of words here. So there we've got Roi Jean. So we're in French here.
The year of the Lord?
Actually, King John, le Roi Jean, du Roi Jean. And this is from the, this is a receipt, Simon de Gargoule. And it's coming out of the French Royal Chancery with one of the court clerks here, Robert de Haché, who we know from other legal documents and other court documents coming out of the Royal French Court in the middle of the 14th century. So this is a little receipt, but coming from the king's accounts.
Everything was Latin from one country to the other.
Yeah. And so a few things that you can see in here are just kind of how plain it is. It is just a little receipt, except for the scribal signature here.
With the same ink, it looks like.
Omega.
Mm-hmm. And then if we look on the other side, not much there. So a very plain thing, just a record-keeping object. But we've got 5 or 6 of these from the French court, both under Jean II and under Charles V, from the middle to the second half of the 14th century. And there must have just been so many of these produced that they've stayed on the market. But interesting to start tying together actual names of some of the scribes working in the process of tracking the money for the court. All right, let's see here. How are we doing so far? Any questions?
Yeah, I had one question about that last receipt.
Yeah.
Was that part of a page and had been sliced out like a whole series of documented transactions, or was that a piece that was given to the person that affected?
That's an excellent question. So just looking at it, it looks very regular. I think your theory that it might have been cut out of a book, of a ledger, makes good sense. Often, and I didn't get any of them out, but often if this was a standalone document, it might have been paired with another, and you would have had a pattern cut into it so that the two documents fit together for authorization purposes, really. But this does look like just an entry in a longer ledger. So yeah, it very well could have been cut out of a book at some point, and then circulated on its own. It has been folded, as you can see here. So it may have been cut and folded at the time.
Into a wallet or something.
All right, so for a different kind of legal document, sort of, I'd like to show you two more books. One that's has been in the collection for quite some time, and Bill may be aware of it already, and then one that came in fairly recently. So the first one here is get this set up. So this is a manuscript of statutes from the Congregation of the Clergy in Venice. And there are a couple of interesting things to point out about this. First of all, you'll see a 9971 here, and then again here. This comes out of the famous Phillips manuscript that you all may know about, and if you don't, he's a fabulous character to get to know. 19th century book collector who absolutely filled his very, very large house with thousands and thousands of manuscripts. So when he died in the late 19th century, the library started being sold off, and the final auction, I believe, was in the mid-1960s. So it took that long to disperse the library. And we've got a number of books from that library in our collection here. This one was probably part of a larger manuscript to begin with. Oxford University has a couple of books that fit with this. You'll notice, for instance, here that there's a foliation of 225. So this is something from a much larger book to begin with, but beautifully decorated 15th century manuscript of rules for religious life in Venice. And a lot of those manuscripts were dispersed in the 18th and 19th century.
Sorry, Benjamin, I missed which century?
This is a 15th century book.
15th.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that the rules change over time a little bit. So as we look through, you see people commenting on them, sometimes signing off on them.
You're getting feedback, Benjamin.
I am?
Yeah, your voice is something.
Okay.
You're good now.
Better? Okay.
Interesting how they.
So the hands do change over time. We've got dating in the margins for some of these.
Is this the same Phillips of the Phillips collection?
It is.
Gallery?
Sir Thomas Phillips. Yep, that's the one.
Yeah, I mean the one in Washington with all the days.
I don't know that there's a connection to that, Phillips.
Okay.
That's a good question. Because so if we see here towards the end, some of these rules have been crossed out, so practices change over time. These have been canceled.
What got canceled?
Just the papers.
No,
Yep. So
rules.
just the rules. Yep.
Yeah, I make the question because somewhere in the mid 15th century, the Viennese created something called double accounting, double book accounting, or double ledger accounting, which allowed them to accurately on any given day or week produce cash flow and produce very accurate estimates of profits, etc. And anybody who was anybody got into the spice trade in Venice because they had invented this way to know what money you had, what money you expected, and what your debts and credits were. And that was really the first, and is still in practice today.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Really good. So to compare this, so this is 15th century male religious statutes.
Yeah.
We can look at another kind of shabby little book, but this is the 15th century Milan rules for the poor clerics. And this is, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I occasionally bike by their monastery or their convent.
Oh,
So it's very similar here.
it's off University.
No, it's just up here in the hills.
Yeah, it's right off University.
And this is a book this particular book had been circulating in the States in the trades since at least the 19th century. So it probably came out of Italy in the late 18th, early 19th century to an American buyer, and then has been sold and resold in the States until it came to us.
The regulations have changed through the years.
They sure have. Yeah, it's very hard to get things out of Italy now. But again, you can see that some of the rules have been canceled. So changing practice over time. In fact, this one was so heavily canceled it went through the vellum. And some annotations as we go through. But the thing that I like best about this particular book that John Mustaine and I got together is this name. There we go. In a very faint hand down here at the bottom, Sister Arcangela Lucretia Canobia. So we have an early owner of this manuscript, her name written in right at the bottom, and a wonderful connection to somebody that we can put a name to that is associated with this book. Her writing is a little bit later, so probably 16th or 17th century owner of a book that had circulated for a couple hundred years. So a really nice personal connection to a book that is now 500 years old, 600 years old. Okay, so from rules of orders in Italy, I wanted to take us to a discovery from the vault. And here I'm going to switch cameras. And this is a story that could only have happened during COVID times, when we had a little bit of time to get down into the vault and clean things up. And as we were looking through, close this up a bit. As we were looking through the vault, there was a very, very large book on the shelf. Let's see if I can shift this over just a little bit. So let's see, you can kind of get a sense for the scope here of how big this is. It's roughly half as big as I am. It's bound in boards that are about a ½ inch thick. So you can see about the size of my finger. Covered in leather, very heavy metal fittings on it. And staining, which looks to be wax or oil, perhaps, sometimes dripped down the entire front of the book. The tooling on the leather is fairly simple, and it's, lift this up, it's quite a hefty volume. You can see it's as thick as my hand here. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. The boards are a little loose, but I've been assured by conservation that it's okay to work with it. And I'm going to tell you some details about the book as we look at it that you probably won't be able to see at the distance that I had to put the camera to get it all in the book. So what we have here is a dealer code with a cost, and then the date 1892 in Mexico. This is on paper that lines the inside of the board. So my read on that is that this was a dealer code in 19th century Mexico about the time the book was being sold. There are a couple other things that we can see here. One is a very early Stanford Library stamp and a serial number 133284. So I was able to go back into the archives and find out that this book was listed in 1910 as having already been in the university's collection. So it came to us sometime before 1910. And the reason that I say it's a discovery in the vault is that we had no catalog record for this. It was not discoverable in any way, even though in the first half of the 20th century, somebody had known what it was and probably had a catalog card for it. It likely got separated from its catalog record when we moved from the card catalog to the online records some 40 years ago now. So what we're looking at here is very large pieces of vellum in a Spanish style. But the decoration is weird.
For the choirs.
Yeah.
So you can see that the decoration here, the color's not super, let me see if I can get a little bit better light on this for you. Kind of a blue and yellow there. And then on the other side, a very faint purple, sort of a light red and yellow. And whoever was decorating didn't seem to be able to stay within the lines very well. So kind of a rough decoration scheme. And Bill, this is where I'm going to turn to you because I'm hoping you've seen something like this before.
Well, it looks as if it's the office for the dead.
It is. Good eye. Oh my gosh, that was even farther into the details than I had expected. Yes, every single piece in here seems to be associated with the Office for the Dead.
Yeah.
So in the entire book. So as we keep moving through.
But
sorry, what does that mean for people who don't know the Office of the Dead?
It's the divine office, that is the 8 services of the day that are chanted when someone dies.
And so the decorative style is fairly consistent throughout.
There's something else noticeable about it, that it could be sung from by quite a number of people. It's so big.
It is so big. It is a monumental book, and it could have been up on a cathedral stand. And in fact, there are a number of books from Mexico from the 19th century that are about this size.
Yeah.
There has been an attempt recently by conservators in Mexico City to bring a lot of these back together, and they've been able to reassemble a half dozen to a dozen of these monumental choir books. There was a cathedral school in Mexico City that was closed down in the mid-19th century, and most of the collection there seems to have been dispersed, and I suspect this came from that batch. Further, it probably came through somebody like Timothy Hopkins or Jane Stanford, who were collecting things like this, mission music, Mexican artifacts in the late 19th century. So I suspect this came in through them. I don't know how well you can see this. but there's a corroded metal border around this decorated initial.
Mm.
There's a skeleton with a crown shooting a bow and arrow here, and then some very interesting Spanish-influenced Baroque decoration throughout here. And this is just a stunning book. It's in terrible shape. In some cases, the pages have been taped back together. And it's a book that must have been in use for a couple of hundred years, at least. Probably in a very public space. And here you'll see another initial with a face, a monkey, some insect material, insects up here, a dragon along the side. So I'm very, very eager to have liturgists, musicologists, and art historians take a look at this to see if we can piece together the story of how it left Mexico and came to us. Mm-hmm. It's been patched, it's been sewn over. There are some wonderfully thick tabs to help you navigate the book. And if I could show you one book in person from this whole batch that we're looking at tonight, this would be the one, because it's just something to behold. And a book, go ahead.
Benjamin, I noticed upper right-hand corner of every other page, a crudely written, perhaps hand page. Is there any indication that as we have seen it, as you flip through it, that is the actual sequence of this book, or was it possibly bound together in another sequence, the pages?
That's an excellent question. And what I can say just from a cursory look at this is that sequence was added at some point later. There's evidence that the different sections have been rebound at different times. And there are a couple of different foliation schemes towards the end of the book that we can point out. So here we've got a 92, an 87, and something that's been erased here. So there are at least 3 foliation schemes here. And as we go further back in the book, this is an 89 and this is 109. So there's been some significant rebinding over time. And I think this
also guess that some of it has been lost.
I suspect so, yeah. And there a couple of the later sections are 18th century. So it's a book that's maybe started its life in the 16th century, but was used well, really used well, saw a hard life of use into the 18th and 19th centuries. So a lot, I think, can be done to uncover more details about this book. And I hope that people will get interested in it and explore it some more. All right, this is the, yes.
Can I ask, the top edges look like someone chewed on them. Did that happen?
Yeah, so this, again, this is one that I would love it if you could explore it in person. There's water damage. There is wax dripping down from the pages. There's some mold, and there are areas where it looks like rats have eaten away portions of the page. So I think this was really, it's seen some hard use over time.
Where do you think it was actually created? It looks like Italian to me.
Oh, that's a good question. What makes you think Italian?
Well, because I have an Italian manuscript and it looks like the same sort of text written.
Yeah. So Bill will be more knowledgeable about this than I am, but this size book and this sort of presentation hand is, I'm interested that you said Italian, because some folks have thought that the decorated scheme looks somewhat Italian, but it also looks like some of the Spanish books that were produced in the 16th century. And it seems like portions of the book, at least, were produced in the New World. Some may have come over from the continent. And this is a book that I would love to do some DNA analysis with to see if we can determine where the animals came from that make it up. So another bit of experimenting to do.
So it's on John.
The 5-line staff is more likely Spanish.
Oh, thanks, Bill. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of it.
What did he say?
It's likely Spanish.
And the black decoration schemes. Let's see if we can find one. Whoop. Oh, hey, there's a page that's completely different from all the others. Well, that's fun. Fun to pull that out. Right. So some of these are very Spanish in style as well. And we've got actual books that were produced in Spain at the time that have more finely executed initials, but in this style. All right.
And that's also the Requiem Mass, so it's got both office and mass in it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, an index of what's in here would be a wonderful place to start. Let's see if I can move this off the table without hurting myself. Bend with the knees. Bend with the knees. But I think it's a stunning piece. Let's see if we can get this here. I'm going to bring the camera down just a little bit because it's a smaller book. And I hope you don't mind exploring this with me just a little bit, because I've never seen anything like this manuscript, and I'm hoping that one of you all seen something that sparks some interest. So I'll describe it to you because I can't have you look at it yourself right now. But this is, again, about 1/2-inch wood boards with leather over it, and then decorative metal with fleur-de-lis all over it around these bosses. So just a pattern, almost star-like, of fleur-de-lis all around. And some signs of clasps here as well, both along the sides and the bottom. And as we open it up, this is...
Looks beautiful, doesn't it?
It does. And this decorative scheme is something that suggests Jesuit to me. But I've never seen a manuscript done in these colors before. So I'm going to turn to the back because I don't want this to be too drawn out of a mystery for you. But we're looking at a book, at least saying it was produced in 1673, Jesuit. And Bill, I'd love to talk to you more about this because some of the pieces in here seem to be Carmelite, and I don't know if maybe it was a mixed house. Pasted onto the end is some chant that's been written in a rhythmic notation. So Cantus Fractus here.
That would be characteristic of the late 17th century into the 18th century.
Right, and the hand here looks much later than the book itself.
Yeah.
But as we look through, the decorative scheme is so consistent throughout in these brilliant oranges, yellows, and reds and blacks. The manuscript's on paper. Just a stunning piece. And I would encourage you to come back and look at this in person, but the camera itself that we're looking at here is not capturing the vibrancy of the colors, even though it looks okay on screen. These really pop off the screen for us. So I know nothing about this book. We have no record of it, and I've not been able to tie it back to a pre-online record acquisition. So no idea what this is, where it came from, or when it came into the collection, which is the best kind of mystery. Okay, any questions about this or anything more you want to look at as we're with this book? I know we're getting close to time and I've just got one or two more things to show you.
Just a thought that you said you might wish to explore more about the prior books, illustrations. correct me if I'm wrong, haven't we had someone by the name of Chet Van Duzer speak to us about
Yeah.
animals on maps? He actually lives, I believe, in Los Gatos or Saratoga, somewhere there. And he may be a resource for you.
That's an excellent suggestion. Chet is brilliant, and I hadn't even made the connection on the animals portion. I've known him as a map guy,
Yep.
But having him look at the flora and fauna is a great idea. I really like that.
And the other suggestion is, do you know the work over at Slack on the, what is it? Aristotle? No.
Archimedes.
Yes, Archimedes palimpsest. Yeah, Uwe Bergman.
That's right.
Is a good friend of mine, and I just thrilled to see that presentation. And they may be able to offer you some assistance.
That's super. I'm working with Uwe on on some work on some early printed books. They're doing analysis of inks using the Slack beamline, and I will definitely bring up some testing with him on the pigments there.
Tell him Mr. 491092 said to say hello.
You bet, I will. Super. Thanks for those suggestions. Those are great. All right, so we've moved forward in time just a little bit, and we're getting close to time. So I just wanted to close with a small thing that I thought you might be interested in, which is 19th century medievalisms. And we've been collecting in this area for a while now. John started us off. But this past year was able to acquire some work by a Scottish artist named Phoebe Trackwire. And I don't know if any of you all are interested in the arts and crafts in England or the Scottish arts and crafts. But Phoebe Trackwire was an artist initially from Ireland who moved to Edinburgh. And she was well known for her decoration in buildings and for her illustrations. And she happened in the 1880s to borrow a couple of French medieval manuscripts from John Ruskin, the art critic and artist, and then copied decorated initials out of those. So here you see she gilded it. She did a wonderful job copying directly from the manuscript. And we're very fortunate to be able to have a couple of her pieces here. She's just a stunning figure in that late 19th, early 20th century arts and crafts style.
Yeah.
Let's see. And so these have been fully digitized in high resolution. The link is in the document that I put in chat and that I'll send through Evelyn as well. So you can zoom in and see things like the wonderful bird up in the corner here. And all of the work that she did. Basically trying to recover some of the techniques of manuscript illuminators of the past. All right, I've been talking your ear off. You've asked some good questions as we've gone, but do you have any questions for me before we start wrapping up?
I do.
Fire away.
If you could go out and buy anything on the top of your list tonight, what would you buy?
Is money any object?
No.
Can I just
Something that you've really, really wanted for the collection for a long time. What would those things be?
What I would really love to get is more vernacular manuscripts. A lot of our students don't have Latin, and the language can be a barrier. So what we see, particularly as we get students into the classroom, is that manuscripts written in languages that they can read and recognize, European languages or others, really get a lot of interest. We've had some charters, like I was showing you in the Latin ones, in English from a slightly later period, and those immediately get a lot of attention. And so things like that we could get students really engaged with, sort of as a gateway to the more difficult earlier manuscripts, would be absolutely wonderful. And then if money was absolutely no object, I would like to get the only Guillaume de Machaut manuscript still in private hands. What do you think, Bill? Can we raise, I don't know.
Is it for sale?
It's not officially for sale, but it will be eventually.
Is this the one owned by the guy in Kansas?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I saw it at Cambridge.
It's absolutely stunning.
It's beautiful.
Probably doesn't belong at Stanford, but I would take it anyway.
Right.
And how much might it cost to acquire that one?
When it was purchased 30 years ago, it was $8 million.
Oof.
Wow.
So, you know, new building, whole staff, or a manuscript. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is answerable, but was there a cultural shift that you can identify between when people started viewing these items as antiquities to be preserved versus objects to be used? You know, you see a lot of medieval manuscripts that have early modern annotations in them, and I'm just wondering when it happened that we decided that we shouldn't, you know, write in books, which I agree with, but I'm just wondering when that shift happened.
That's a fascinating question. And thank you for asking it. I just finished reading some work by a scholar named Uri Smilansky, who's based in the UK, who was looking at signs of use in a music manuscript and trying to date it, asking exactly those questions. When does it stop being an object that can be used? When does it become an object of reverence or study? And at least with the manuscript he was looking at notations that he thought were created in the 18th century, when some of these manuscripts were still circulating in private libraries before they had been snapped up by the national libraries. And there's something there in sort of the mid-18th century, late 18th century, where things are being moved into national collections that ends that process of sort of amateur interaction with the book. They're not correcting the book, so that, you know, they're looking at it as something that could still be written on in the margins, but they're not fixing the text. And so there's that shift that happens sort of 16th, 17th century, where they stop interacting with the book as if they cared about the content, to this period in the 18th century where they're interacting with it as, I don't know, an object of study, but something that wasn't too precious. And then as we move into the late 18th and 19th century, that's when it's hands off and nobody gets to write on them anymore. Does that make sense? That may not be the case everywhere, but that seems to be what was happening in the study he was looking at.
That kind of comports with my anecdotal, you know, thoughts over observing these, but yeah, that it's just interesting. I would love to learn more eventually about attitudes and how the attitudes changed and what that says about people's attitudes toward collecting and preservation and conservation.
I think that ties in really well with some of the studies as well about the breaking up of Italian manuscripts in the 18th and early 19th centuries, where they became commodities for collectors. And there's something tied into both the destroying of the original manuscript and the collecting of the pieces that would be fascinating to untangle. So if you do some reading in that, or if you do some writing in that area, do let me know, because it's a fascinating time period as our attitudes change about these things.
I was going to say that maybe some of the original owners found them more precious than some of the intermediary owners in later years.
I suspect that's right. Yeah, for the areas that I know, if you look at how the French royal family treated the books they owned versus how some of the sort of 16th and 17th century owners treated the books that were circulating, it's very different. It was different attitudes towards how to handle the books and interact with them. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, why don't you all be thinking about what you want to look at next year when we can actually get stuff out on the tables for you. And then it's been wonderful meeting with you virtually for the last couple of years, but I cannot wait to have you in the reading room and turn you loose on some of this material. So let's come up with a great list over the next year, kind of anything in the collection you want to see will get out when you come in 2023. Yes, 491092.
William Grindley, incidentally, I've only known Evelyn 45 years. So I would like to see early Venetian, if possible, double entry bookkeeping
Okay.
logs,
We'll see what we can find.
which would tell me that maybe there's a pile of money you're not tapping into the business school.
That would be nice to know.
Take care. Thank you very much. That was very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. We
Thank you.
appreciate you
Thank
doing
you.
this again.
Thank you.
Good night
Thank
and
you.
good luck.
Take
Good
care.
night.
See you next year for real.
Absolutely.
Bye, all fellow Sumerians. Yes. Bye-bye.
Yes, this is our final thing for this season. So see everybody again in October when we'll start up again.